Welcome to another in a continuing series of Kiuwan webinars. This time we're going to be talking about using Kiuwan with Azure DevOps. Specifically, we're going to be digging into the Q1 Azure DevOps plugin. My name is JD Burke. For those of you that have tuned in to other of our webinars, you have seen the work I've done and have a chance to get to know me. But for those that are new, this is a little bit about me. We have an agenda. We'll talk a little bit about Q1, a little bit of an overview about SAST and Q1. Then we'll jump right into the Azure DevOps plugin. And then I'll take a time out and show you a couple times how to actually set up the plugin so you can actually see it done and see how easy it is. And then if you end up watching this video later, you'll have a reminder of how quick and simple it is and how you can get to work quickly with Q1. So a little bit about Q1. Q1 is a global company providing end-to-end application security for developers. We're a member of the Adira family of products. So that's a fairly large family, ranging from software development platforms to database platforms. We live in the DevOps tool area, and our cousins include products like TestRail, Assembler, Ranorex, and Travis CI. Kiuwan is a static application security testing tool. So that is, we scan your source code looking for patterns that indicate security flaws, or you'll see later on code quality issues. We also do SCA, software composition analysis, which is analyzing your source code for third-party and open source components, and then commenting on the security posture of those components. That gives you an idea of what building blocks you're using in your code that may be vulnerable or exposing you to risk. In the larger picture, Q1 is a SAST and SCA product. So most of our analysis lives in the cloud. We do have a local analyzer, a thing we call the Q1 local analyzer, that can be downloaded on-prem and then used either by developers or tools in your tool chain to scan your code. Today, we're going to be talking about that type of use case where we have the Q1 local analyzer being driven by a plugin in an Azure repo. So you can use multiple repos, you can use multiple CI/CD pipeline technologies, but the fundamental concept is going to be the same, where Azure is going to make a call out to an agent to drive Q1 to do a scan of the source code and then report the source code back to the repo. In the larger pipeline picture, we're going to be hanging out mainly in the developer area with an Azure repo and using the repo to trigger Q1 scans on the repo's behalf. So we won't be playing much of the role as a developer or scanning as a developer. We'll be scanning based on the developer putting some code into the repo and then the repo making a request out to Q1 to run a scan on its behalf. So the Q1 Azure DevOps plugin is a free plugin. All of our plugins and integrations for customers are free. It allows Azure DevOps to place a call into Q1 and specifically the Q1 local analyzer and run a scan on Azure's behalf. Those scans that you can run will either be a baseline or a delivery scan. So baseline and delivery scans are Q1 terminology. Baseline, or in this case, the Q1 use of baseline is a specific version of an app and its scans that's relevant enough to be used as reference for other scans. So that's some amount of code work that you've done that is stable enough that you want to place a stake in the ground and declare this as a merge or a pull request that is a candidate for baseline. And then we can do subsequent scans against that baseline and see and mark how your quality and your security has changed with respect to that baseline. And we frequently measure the difference between a baseline and what you're working on today with a thing called a delivery scan. Delivery scan is just a Q1 security scan, but it pays attention more closely to the diff, or the difference between the baseline that you registered earlier and the code you're working on now. And that can pay benefits a little bit later on when you're trying to just analyze what a given developer is doing, or an in-progress commission or commit into the database, or code that's a candidate to be pushed to baseline, and you want to do a quick scan of it to make sure that it's actually going the right direction, quality and security-wise. You can read more about this Azure plugin that we're going to be playing with today by going to our homepage and looking up at our resources pages and searching for developer integrations. I'll show you this a little bit later, but this is the link we're going to be going to. Setting up the Azure Kiuwan plugin is very straightforward, but it does come with some assumptions for today's webinar. So for today's webinar, I'm assuming that you already have an organization established in Azure, and that you've created at least one project inside that organization. So this is not going to be a webinar on how to set up Azure. It's just going to be an example of how to turn on the Kiuwan scanning in your Azure project inside Azure DevOps. So to begin with, it's very straightforward. You click into your project. So you went to your organization in ADO, and you clicked into the project that you want to add Kiuwan to. And then at the bottom, there's a, on the left-hand shade that pulls out, there's a project settings panel that you can click on, and you create a service connection. Create a service connection to introduce Azure to Kiuwan, and specifically Azure and the username and password of the account you want to own the scan. This becomes important if you have service type accounts instead of user accounts in Kiuwan. If you were to create an account that was just to be used by your pipelines, you might add that as the username and password under the project settings service connections. Or if you wanted to have each one of your developers create their own pipeline, they would use their username and password. Once you click on New Service Connection, you'll get a dialog box that you can use to populate the URL of the Kiuwan you are using. For most people, it's going to be our SaaS URL. So you just use this kiuwan.com, www.kiuwan.com. Some of you will have SSO enabled, and you may wish to put in some additional information there. But for the rest of us, we'll just put in username and password and then verify that the connection works. Once you've created a connection from Azure to Kiuwan, you can click on your project's pipeline. And assuming you have a functioning pipeline, you can click into that pipeline and then edit the pipeline. So once again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time teaching you how to set up an Azure pipeline. I'm assuming that you already have one in your repo. But when you get to this point, you'll click on the pipeline and then we'll edit the pipeline. And then once you edit the pipeline, you'll be presented with a right-hand shade that pulls out and called tasks. And from there, you can click into the task search box and then search for Kiuwan. And you get a choice of which type of scan you wish to add to your pipeline, a baseline or a delivery. So before you select baseline or delivery, click into the YAML on the left-hand side to locate an insertion point. And when you click on the right-sided task, baseline or delivery, it will automatically populate with code to insert the code to launch Kiuwan inside your YAML. So we'll take a look at this in a little bit more detail here in a moment, but essentially it's that easy to add Kiuwan to your YAMLs. From there, you can fine tune and decorate your YAML triggers. Don't forget, there's a strong encouragement for you to not forget to use the API. So you might be able to lower on after the scan has, lower on in the YAML after the scan has completed, add some call outs to the Kiuwan REST API and pull back additional information that you might want to add to your build ticket. So you can collect additional information about the build, whatever is important for you and your organization. And then here in a moment, I'll take you through this process again, and then we'll actually modify some sample code that I have and check our work. So let me take us there now. And make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So here you see my Azure DevOps, my organization, and a couple of projects I created. This is the one you saw in the PowerPoint. And as I said, you go down to project settings. So you click into the project and click down on project settings. And then in the pipeline section, down in the bottom, you see service connections. If you click on that, you can add service connections. You can click on new service connection and then search for Kiuwan. Brings up a default connector. And from there, as I said in the PowerPoint, you can add a URL. So largely it's this. Most of you will be this. Put in your username and password. If you want, you can, actually we'll go ahead and just do that. Verify. You can give it a name, something meaningful to your organization, and then go ahead and verify and save. And you'll have a connection that you can select in the next steps that we're going to. So once you've created a service connection, you can go back over to the pipelines. So this is the project and pipelines. And I already have a pipeline established. And I can click into that pipeline and then edit that pipeline. And you see it brings up the task menu. Or if we wanted, we could go over to pipelines and create a new pipeline. So, and then from there, when we go back to editing our pipelines, we can search for Q1. And you have an option of the two types of scans you can produce. So for example, if I were to delete this, remember in the previous project settings, we created connector services. So I can select one of those. I can fine tune which variables I want to use in my YAML. There are other variables that we can set and modify to fine tune our scans. And then once I've finished all that, go ahead and include, and it auto-populates with the code to run Kiuwan from Azure DevOps. Then I can save that. Save that. And then from there, I can see I just populated. Adding Azure to your, or Q1 to your Azure pipeline is that hard. All it takes is just creating the service connector, going to the pipeline, editing the pipeline, and then finding the pre-manufactured plugins and selecting which one you want to add to your YAML, and then fine-tuning the YAML after that. So we'll go ahead and do a quick run of some sample code here. So I've opened up Visual Studio Code actually, and I have a sample Python program. This is actually some code from a book called Python Crash Course by Eric Matthews, or Mathes. And we'll go ahead and make a change to it. And then I'll go ahead and save that code. Oops. And then I'll go ahead and process the commit. Let's see. And then I'll push the code up to Azure. And then Azure runs its pipeline. It sends me an email that my build has been processed. And right now, Kiuwan is working on the scan. And then eventually I'll get an email that the scan has been completed. The build chain has been completed. So while that's cooking, we'll go ahead and try this one more time, show you this in a little bit slower detail and fuller detail. Before I do that though, Azure just told me that my build is complete. And to remind you what we did, you can go to Kiuwan Resources Product Documentation. That's our public website and all of our publicly facing documentation. You can search for developer integrations, and you can see a list of all of our plugins that we have available for the common CI/CD tool sets that we support today. These are all free, and from time to time they'll change and improve, so check back often. The instructions that we're using today are from that page. So I clicked into the project, clicked on project settings, went to service connections, and created a service connection. And to do that, I searched for Kiuwan and found the default container. Populated that with the SaaS URL, because I'm using SaaS as opposed to our on-premise version of Kiuwan. Then I went ahead and typed in the username and password. Verified that I can log in, gave it a meaningful name so I can find it in my Azure dashboard. And I went back over to the project and looked at the pipelines. And once I click into pipelines, I can edit the pipeline, select an insertion point for the code that we're going to be adding. Go over to the tasks panel and search for Q1 and select either baseline or delivery analysis. Select the service. And then from here, you can type in variables, for example, an analysis label if you wanted to add metadata to your scans to make it easier to find in the Q1. You can, there are several variables that you can set and fine tune for this pipeline for that task. And then once you have those set, you add that and save it. And from here, if you wanted, you could write more sophisticated YAML code to have that task be more complicated or add additional information that's of value to you. And then, like I did in real time, we went ahead and modified some of the code, some of the Python code. And then from there, you can go ahead and do whatever it is you normally do to save your code and push it up to the repo. So staging the changes and then merging the changes or committing them. And then the code gets pushed up to the repo. The repo detects the new code and then lights off the pipeline to go ahead and process the YAML. And then from there, you'll start to see your normal messaging from Q1 and from Azure. The messaging from Azure that acknowledges the pipeline change or the pipeline trigger and the progress through the pipeline. And then eventually you'll get an email from Kiuwan notifying you, if you have it set up this way, you'll get an email from Kiuwan notifying you that the analysis is done and that you can come back and check the results. So from there, you can see that Q1's still working on an analysis. And if you put in the pipeline, if you amended the label tag, you can decorate your scans so that you can figure out which scan that build is populating. And from there, you're ready to start adding additional pipelines. So perhaps you have a pipeline for a baseline scan and you have a pipeline for a development scan. You might have pipelines that add additional information or have a more sophisticated YAML. You might have a leaner pipeline that that is stripped down and just does Q1 scans so that you can blast through those faster. All right. Let's go back over here. So we asked Q1 to scan our source code to do a SAST scan. I actually asked it to do a SAST and an SCA scan, so code security and insights in Q1 terms. When you perform a Q1 SAST scan, we're scanning your code looking for defects and vulnerabilities as defined by normative standards such as these. So we have codified some 12 or 13 plus normative standards, and we do those scans with respect to over 33 languages, but specifically with respect to these some 25 plus frameworks. And the vulnerabilities we're looking for, generally speaking, are these. You know these are the formal names, but you know them as SQL injection and sanitization, deserialization, that type of thing. We also actually don't just do security scanning. Q1 is a quality tool as well. So when we scan your code, we're actually scanning from more of an ISO 25000 point of view, which includes security, thinking that secure code begins with high quality code. And we break out the security component and present that to you in a more sequestered way so that your information security people can have a cleaner view onto the source code. But we actually do look at your code with respect to code quality and the other pillars of code quality. And when we bring that all back, that's all contained in those scans that you initiated from your Azure plugin. All right, and with that, I think we're down to that point where we can start opening up for any questions or comments. Before I get too deep into chasing questions and any of the unanswered questions, you can always contact us with the coordinates here. So you can find more information on our blog. I took you to some of our documentation places where you can read more about user manuals of Q1 and other information from Q1. And then you can find this, you'll be able to find this video and others on our YouTube channel. Then you can like and subscribe there. And if any time you have questions or comments, you can go ahead and contact us and we'll get back to you with anything that we know. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that were unanswered or that I can field. So I have some colleagues monitoring the channels. Aaron, did you field any questions? While we're waiting for that, my scan is done. So we've completed our scan and have a new updated scan. All right. Oh, some questions are coming in. Hold on, stand by. I'm gonna break those out so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, Wim asks, what kind of reporting is generated with the scan? So Wim, I'm sure somebody's gonna answer you in your question there, but I'll go ahead and field it for everybody else on the webinar. So the reporting is handled by Q1. So it doesn't really matter what scan you do or where you start that scan, if you started from Azure or if you started from the Q1 dashboard, the reporting is all the same. And Q1 generates a series of reporting. We have, depending on what features you have enabled, we have a pre-canned PowerPoint that we can generate. We have PDFs that we generate. Probably more helpful for you would be a CSV or a JSON formatted file that you can download from the dashboard. And then I would not be surprised that if you don't quickly graduate from that dashboard reporting to going to the API and pulling back the data in either a CSV or JSON type format, a flat file format, so that you can incorporate it into your other reports and your other signaling. So to summarize, all the reporting that is normally available in Q1 is generated and available when you launch a scan from an external actor like Azure DevOps. And that, generally speaking, that means you're probably going to hang out on the JSON or the CSV downloads or the Excel downloads from the dashboard, or you're going to go into the API and pull specific points back so you can stitch those into your own reporting. And then Max asks, we're authenticating this to Q1.com. That's correct. And that's true for most of our customers. We do have some customers who run Q1 on-premise. So there is a model that we sell where you can take the cloud version of our Q1 and put it into a Docker and bring it on-prem. And you do that for risk and threat management reasons. And in their case, their URL is going to be different, of course, because they're going to be going to their instance on-prem. But it's the same concept. Where is your Q1 engine? Put the URL for that Q1 engine, and then you'll authenticate against that. If you're single sign-on, then that's a pretty simple model to understand as well. Instead of authenticating to Q1.com, you're going to put in the URL of your IDP or your domain ID, and you'll be bounced through your IDP to authenticate you before you get redirected to Q1. And it looks like, Max, you found some SSO stuff there too, so that's good. Okay, and it looks like there's a question about Active Directory credentials, and if you're having difficulty authenticating single sign-on or getting the Azure plugin to authenticate through an external actor, then you can contact us, specifically support@q1.com, and we'll help work through that. But those models are pretty straightforward and simple, so it should be a pretty quick support call, and just to figure out which variable we're putting in the wrong hole, or what is the proper nomenclature to use for that specific service. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap it up for today? All right, so I do not see any, and I don't hear any. So with that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you once again for dialing in to our webinar, and remind you that if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop us an email, and we'll get back to you and start up a dialogue. And that you can find this webinar, a link to this webinar, in an email coming to your inbox soon. And then shortly after that, you should be able to find this and other webinars on our YouTube channel. So with that, I wish everybody to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you on the next webinar next month. Thanks.